David, it's great to have you with me today. And I just have to give a shout out to Paul, who did introduce us, and I know you were on his podcast. So I'm thankful for the connection. And you and I got to have a little chat prior to this and got to know each other a little bit more. So I know you have an incredible journey, and I know you're sharing it with others. You have a podcast of your own, and you're running through things and doing many things. So how about we just start this conversation off with, just sharing who you are, what you're passionate about, what you're doing, and then we can dive into how you became who you are today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited that we got connected. I've been checking out your show, become a fan, was really looking forward to our talk today. Some of the topics we talk about are hard, but just as well as my platform as yours, we smile and we've learned to enjoy the ride, right? And I just think that's very, very empowering, and so I appreciate the opportunity to meeting with you. But yeah, my name is David Keck. I am an open gay man in the South, and that will play a huge factor in the story that we discussed today. My passion now is mental health and awareness, and I have a podcast at this moment. It's called Surviving. So I've kind of set it up where we're doing it in chapters. So for the longest time, it was surviving abuse. So then I felt that was kind of painting me into a corner. And then so I dropped the abuse part and went with surviving. And now I'm in a place where I want to focus more on the healing. And so we are transitioning into the process. And so we've got a lot of cool things coming, but luckily, no matter how you can look for the process, you can look for surviving abuse, you can look for surviving, and I'm going to pop up. So I'll still be easy to find.
Awesome. That's awesome. So, so what was your journey like to get to where you are today? Where would you like to be?
So, I'll start out with saying that my life would definitely not be on this path had a particular situation not occurred. And I'm in a place now where I am not mad that it happened. I'm in a place now where I actually wouldn't change it. I would never have asked for it, but I finally took control and learned that I'm the one driving the car now. And so as I said, I am an open gay man in the South. I did not know hate existed until 9 years ago. And I went out to a bar with my friends, and it was a bar that we frequent regularly. It was our Cheers. It's karaoke. And there was a guy there that he is a military man. And he was just discharged from the military at the time, but surveillance cameras show that he stopped me and was talking to me. It looked like a pleasant conversation. My friends and I finished our drinks. We left, 3 of us left together, and surveillance shows that he left about 3 minutes later. I was a victim of a hate crime. He somehow got to my house. I don't have a lot of memory of this. Some speculate maybe he got into my car and I was giving him a ride. Some speculate that he followed me home, but we're really not sure. So he comes inside my house and spends hours sexually assaulting me and beating me until he thought he killed me. So he takes my cell phone, calls his baby mama, and confesses to murder and goes bar hopping on my credit cards, and then gets drunk and wrecks. So when the cops come to the scene, he was covered in blood that was not his, and he confessed to murder, and they found my body 18 hours later, expecting me to be dead.
So you really weren't dead, right?
No.
Right?
No.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
What are the chances of him thinking that and saying that,
Yeah. Well, he says in court and in trial, he said, that I just looked like an easy target. I looked like I had a lot of money, and I've always been a small guy. And he's trained military. His hands are weapons. And so he said that he knew how to have me knocked out on first hit. And because of the way he was abusing my body, not just sexually, but physically beating me, I broke into seizures. And then he said he had told the mother of his child that, my lips were turning blue and I had stopped bleeding after my seizure and kind of just became a limp body. And so he left thinking that he had murdered me. I was in the same place and position when the police showed up and found me. And so there was 18 hours of lack of oxygen, which also caused me to have a lot of memory loss. I was able to heal and recover from that. It took a lot of time. I wouldn't go all the way of saying amnesia, but there was a time that, for several hours that I didn't recognize my mother and grandmother at the hospital. I thought they were nurses. So it's pretty traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah. And we could dive in a little further afterwards, but what kind of impact did it have on you, I guess, after you regained consciousness, you were, coming through, getting healed?
Yeah, so it took a few days for us to actually, and even for my family to know what had happened. So we thought that maybe I was just mugged. But then a detective showed up at my grandmother's house where I was having to stay at the time because obviously I couldn't even walk. I had to learn how to redo everything all over again, even using the bathroom, on my own. And so the detective shows up and talks to the family, and they're like, you were a victim of a hate crime, and which is why there was a rape test and all these things that I didn't even remember happening because, those rape tests is actually collecting evidence, right? But we found out that my car had been stolen and wrecked, and we just assumed my car was at my apartment complex. But he had actually stolen my car and wrecked my car, and it was impounded. So there was a lot of things that just started happening. It's like every day I was finding something new. My story became very public. So turning on the news, there was a new story of what had happened to me, and I had no recollection of it. The media did paint the picture of that I had taken him home for sex. Through court and trial, we found that we don't believe that is true. I will say that if it was true, it would have been two consensual adults, but his story during court and trial led us to believe that was not true, that is not what happened. But because the media painted it out like that in the South, I started getting a lot of death threats and people wanting to find me and finish the job and thinking that I should be the one in prison for going to a straight bar and sexually propositioning a man.
Wow. I can't imagine. So, I mean, like, what would you say you felt emotionally at that time? You know what I mean?
It was all the things, I remember having a conversation with my therapist because one of the things that the state did do for me that I do appreciate is I was immediately set up with a sexual assault therapist. And I truly had to redefine what words meant, especially when it comes to emotions. I could not remember if this emotion meant that I was sad or mad or glad. My definition of sex changed. All these things changed, and it really was one of those where I went through all the different emotions. I had to figure out and redefine what those were, and they would repeat themselves at different times in different cycles because, again, every day was new to me. There was a new face or a new part of the story. I still don't remember what happened to me. I do remember getting so frustrated that I just kept saying he had one job, and it was to unalive me, and he fell at that. And I was so mad that he had fell at that. And that is the scariest place I think I've ever been.
Yeah, that is scary to even think that. Wow. That's a lot to take in. I'm trying to take that in, you know what I mean? Man. So you're learning, new same stuff over again that you don't remember, and you're watching the news, and so after trial or whatever, he goes, I guess he goes to prison. Does I don't know if he's still there or not. I'm not sure what the outcome was, but I mean, so what and you can elaborate on that if you feel like it. But what was it like to go from him yeah, after trial, you know, and you try to rebuild yourself.
Yeah. So I was relieved when he was sentenced. That was short lived, and I can dive into that as well. But one thing I noticed that made me mad in the beginning, now I understand people's reactions, and sometimes it's just the lack of being able to understand or put themselves in that place. And thank goodness, thank goodness no one in my life had experienced this, right? But when it's like when the judge hit the gavel and sentenced him, people were running up to me and hugging me saying, "It's over, you can move on now." And that was the furthest from the truth. You know, maybe this part was over. Maybe I don't have to see him in court any longer, but so much of my other parts of healing had to be put on hold because I was having to relive it and retell what bit of the story I knew and reheard people creating narratives of what they thought during the trial process. So I became very angry that people thought that just meant it was over. You know, that this kind of assault or trauma or any kind of assault or trauma has a timeline, has a lifeline. You know, there is no expiration date on it. And that was also a huge awakening for me too, because we're taught that time heals all. And then when I was finding that, well, I'm still having these emotions, I'm still feeling a certain type of way, I'm still having triggers, I felt like I was failing again. I felt like I was failing myself because I was not on the path that society said I should be on. I did not understand the impact of trauma and mental health, you know, and that's why I really developed my passion for it. But then, you know, so he was in jail the year of the trial, and then he was sentenced to 12, either 10 or 12 years. And 4 months later, he was released before he ever even made it to prison for good time. And this was before I could walk without a walker. So, of course, when someone calls me from the police department, you know, because they have to call the victim and say, hey, this person is being released, the restraining order is in place, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, I think you're letting the wrong guy go. You know, it's been 4 months. It's been a total of 16 months that he's been in jail with a 10-year sentence. We'll just go with 10. We'll say, you know, because it was either 10 or 12. But they were like, no, he's getting out for good time. And I just remember thinking, but I haven't had good time. How does he have good time? You know, he thought he'd killed me. It was attempted murder. Just because he didn't succeed at what he did doesn't change what he tried to do. But that's on how our justice system works, right? So again, I developed new fears. Now he's out of prison. I could walk into a Walmart or a restaurant and there he is. I have a restraining order, but don't we all have those unspoken restraining orders? Don't come inside my house or my body unless I invite you. And if I tell you no and get out, you are to leave. We already have those unspoken restraining orders, and that wasn't respected. So now I have a piece of paper. And so I was pissed off about that for a long time. And then I realized, during part of the healing, I realized that the piece of paper was validation that people believed me, that people knew that I was attacked, that it was not my fault, that even if I would have sexually propositioned him, he could have said no and that would have been safe and fine. I was not allowed to say no, and it was not safe and fine. And so the restraining order used to be a big pain point for me. But now I have a lot of respect for it and a lot of pride in it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you shared that because I like how you kind of turn it around into a positive, you know, where, yeah, and it took time, I would imagine, you know, and nothing's easy. And to go back on how you said, you know, you didn't have your time, right? He had a year or so, and you're still working on yourself. Like you didn't have all that time, and everybody deals with trauma differently, you know what I mean? And you know, you've had guests, I've had guests, you know, and it's all across the board, you know. It can go months, it could go years, whatever it is, right? So yeah, I mean, so I'm saying that because, you know, I don't know how long it took you, a couple of years maybe. I have no idea, and you can share that. But you know, for me, on my, you know, something personally that happened to me, it took me months, if not a year or plus. You know what I mean? And it's whatever hits you most, right? And how you deal with it. And then it takes time to turn everything into a positive and go, you know what? This was meant to happen for a reason, because now you're sharing what you went through to help others with their mental health. All right.
I I learned that the word cured when it comes to mental health, I'm not sure that I fully believe that. I think we learn how to cope. I think we learn skills and tools to be able to get that control back, you know. I don't know that I'm ever not going to have repercussions of this, but I have the tools to reel it in to where it doesn't. It's one of the things I say quite often to people is dark times and memories come to you for a reason. It's okay to visit those, just don't unpack your suitcase and live there, right? Like that's when it gets dangerous. And so when I learned how to utilize the tools of, okay, I'm feeling a little triggered with this, you know, and I know to focus on my breathing and how to control it, it truly helped. But it did take me, I would say around the 3-year mark is when I finally had that moment of, okay, I'm on the right path.
Nice.
I think it could have potentially happened sooner, but again, it's a year of every month being in court, you know, and so there wasn't, I was having a hard time separating and giving myself time and space because it was on the news. Like a friend of mine said, David, you kind of became famous in a small town. You know, if I remember one time I went to a restaurant and this woman, lovely woman, she saw me and she's a mother, you know, and so she saw me and she came running up to me and just grabbed me and hugged me. I love her for that. But at the same time, that was very triggering to me. But that was not her intent, you know. And so that was one of the moments I realized that okay, I'm kind of able to notice the difference and still give her what she needs, but give myself the boundary. And now look back on it, that was just such a sweet moment, you know. But there's little things like that. Like I would be in line at Walmart and think so many people in his life know what I look like and they know all about me and I don't know anything about them and they could be in line right now plotting how to finish the job. It was a very terrifying place to live.
Yeah, it almost felt like you had to keep looking behind your back, you know. Wow. Do you still feel that a little bit today?
No, no, I don't. And I used to get, when I first started feeling that way, I was always nervous of saying it out loud because I didn't want to like jinx myself or test the universe with it. But I haven't had anybody be negative to my face. It's always the keyboard bullies, right? Anybody that had anything negative to say about my story was someone online with no real name and no picture. And so once I figured out how to separate those because I would truly sit in my car and have to give myself a pep talk before I went into a place. It took a long time before I was willing to go into a facility by myself. You know, like I truly thought, okay, I'm going to go into this restaurant and someone's going to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
Like the world wanted me dead is what I thought, you know. Luckily I was wrong.
Yeah, now you're here today and you're sharing story with other.
So far I've been wrong.
Oh man. No, but so I bring it up several times, you have to like fall apart to get back together and become better, right? And I feel like that's what happens to you, even though that's not what you wanted to go through. And, I went through something I didn't want to go through and other people do. And it's weird how life works for you in a way. And then you go, this is who I'm supposed to be. And I had to go through something to get here, right? Dark and scary, but it's just what it is. What's your take on that?
100% I agree. Like I kind of mentioned during my introduction is my career path was completely different. I was not a stranger to mental health. My family was very aware of mental health, but not to this extent, right? We had our traumas, we had our things, but not on this level and not in my adult life. And so um now my whole business, my whole branding is based on mental health. And I had mentioned how I wouldn't change anything for the world. It's kind of an interesting story. I was a guest on another podcast, and they do this rapid fire question in the end where they ask you like 3 or 5 questions. You just spit out the first thing. Well, the last question they asked me is, would you change what happened to you? And I said, no. And you can see, because it's being recorded, you can see in real time, my face was like I did not know that I was going to say no. And luckily it was at the end of the show, because I had to go outside and really walk with my dogs, pour a glass of wine, had to put my bare feet in the grass to ground myself a little bit, because I was like, what does this mean? And I realized that it has put me on a path that I would not have been on had this not happened. And I'm reaching people. I'm having great conversations. I've made some of the greatest friends, and taking what happened to me and turning it into something beautiful, which is making it not be in vain. And that was my way of controlling. That's my revenge. That's my middle finger to him, per se.
Yeah, I love it. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And like I said, repeat, it's hard to go through this stuff, but you do come out better if you're willing to get better, right? Not everybody does. So you mentioned trigger several times. What do you do to calm yourself down you mentioned grounded, you mentioned breathing. Is one of them you would consider the best one for you? Or is there something else that you haven't mentioned?
Yeah. So I did EMDR. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay. So it's this, it's a form of therapy. It's really interesting, but it's like this eye movement. There's different ways of doing it. I went with the eye movement. Of course, there's a skilled therapist that does it, and they ask you a set of questions while they're doing things with their fingers, and you're following it. And it's supposed to bring memories from the back of your mind to the forefront, and it works. It's really cool. What I had found is memories from my childhood, from childhood trauma, were coming up, and I was not in a place to process those, because my cup runneth over with the trauma that that just happened. And so I had to step away from it for a minute. But there was a couple of really cool things I learned. So when you're in that survival mode, we forget to breathe, and so I found, and it even worked for me when I worked in corporate America. If I was sitting at a round table with people and I would feel anxious, I could just take my hand and pat my leg, just that steady pat, and I start focusing on my breathing. And even if I'm out for a walk or on a conference call, today when we first logged in, even though for 3 years I have a podcast, I'm interviewed, I still get a little anxious and antsy with it. I just start patting my leg, and no one knows that I do it, but it helps me regulate my breathing. And it's that repetition that helps me.
Yeah. I've heard breathing a lot. I've had somebody come on and she shared everything with, Wim or whatever. I might be pronouncing it wrong, right? You might know what I'm talking about. But all these different ways of breathing and to calm down. And it sounds weird. It looks weird, right? But it works. And I would share, I was at an event in Nashville about a month ago, and there was a woman that did breathing, and she did it twice, one each day in the morning, put on a blindfold, everybody had their own, and did it for 10 minutes. And she just said a few things and taught you how to breathe and, as to how you feel, and everybody, just calm, relaxed, and ready to take in what was coming for the day. And it's huge. Maybe we're both in that same area where we hear it more often, because there's other people that don't hear or even venture out and look for it, right? But you might have to go through something like you went through to go, breathing, what's that? And then you're interested, and it works, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. It's so my I have a deviated septum from most of the trauma happened to my face and my head. And so of course I noticed that I wasn't sleeping well. And then once I got into a relationship, and he and we've been together 5 years now. So we lived together, and he's like, "Your snoring is really bad." Well, I lived by myself, or slept in a room by myself. But once I got a partner, he was like, and so it's one of those things too, right? Like I went and had a sleep study, and they're like, you're not breathing when you're asleep, which means it's lack of oxygen. You're not sleeping well. It's 2 hours after you've been awake. You could lay down and take an hour nap, and you're lucky to get up off the couch if you allow yourself to sleep for the hour. It's the whole breathing thing. It truly is what keeps you alive.
Right. And your brain needs oxygen too. Yeah. So my daughter had an issue too with her tonsils and stuff. And they're like, oh, we got to do something because, your oxygen your brain needs oxygen.
Yeah.
Right. And her brain's growing. So it's very important. And if you're by yourself, you don't know unless you have something recording you. Right.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like I definitely recommend it. I know that it's something that's, and there's even things that you can, there's YouTube videos and stuff that goes along with the EMDR kind of breathing thing and what you were discussing too, that I'll watch and listen to, that just really helps. It's one of those things where it becomes backhand. And so you take it for granted. And I know, like, I'll go on walks. I'm like, why am I out of breath? Well, I've not been breathing. And it's truly just a few deep breaths, is what will kind of just reel me in and ground me, and I can think clear again. My brain isn't battling to survive.
Right, exactly. And so I'm going to ask you a question. Would you say you try to be more present now as well?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that is very hard for me. And it's very hard for a lot of victims / survivors and people with PTSD and trauma, right? We're always waiting for the next shoe to drop. We don't believe that we deserve good. So when I'm having a really cool moment with you right now, I'm thinking in my head, I've heard my phone go off 3 times. Something is bad. I'm going to get off this call and something bad is waiting on me because I'm not allowed to enjoy this moment. I don't deserve this moment. I don't deserve this connection. So it took me a long time to get off of that ledge. And that is probably one of the hardest things for me. I didn't know how to live in the moment. I almost in an unhealthy way embraced the word victim because I felt seen and heard. And I felt that if I was a victim, then it can't happen again. What are the odds, right? And if people are feeling sorry for me, then they're not going to come hurt me. They're going to walk on eggshells around me, and then I'm safe. And luckily, I learned to send that away. I don't hate the word victim. I know a lot of people do. And I respect that. I get that. I was a victim of something, but I'm a survivor, and I survived it, and I'm thriving now because I chose to do that. But I'll never tell you that it'll be easy.
No, it's not easy. And everybody's got their own journey, right? And so your rock bottom is different than somebody else's rock bottom. And, you have to feel that for that person too, even though it might be not as bad in your eyes. Right.
Right.
But yeah, and we all have our moments. And I really hope a lot of people do come out stronger and better than what they went through and seek help and, carry on. And I really do. Unfortunately, I do come across people where I feel like they get stuck and you can't help them all. David, you're into mental health. Can you share who you're helping, how people can reach out to you, your podcast a little bit?
Yeah. So like I said, in this moment right now, my podcast is called Surviving Podcast. I'm on all the platforms. And even when the name changes, you'll still be able to find me just the same. but it is turning into the process. And so, kind of like this show, my show, every week we, discuss a different form of trauma that someone went through. There's no comparison. It's not trauma. My path is the hardest I have been on, or what I went through. My trauma is the hardest. What you went through is the hardest for you, right? There's no comparison, but we just talk about it. We share the story, but it's a positive thing. It's a place where you can connect and feel seen and heard with people that are maybe in a different stage in their recovery. The process that we are leading into is where I have designed 16 modules with some of the best top people of how to process the trauma, how to reconnect, how to I use the analogy of the car, right? I was put behind the wheel of a car on a path that I did not choose, but I'm now driving the car. And so I'm on all the socials. You can find me through my name, David Keck, or Surviving Podcast. My emails, my DMs are always open. I don't have a targeted audience. We are a coat of many colors, and it's a really cool thing that I'm very proud of.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to put that stuff in the show notes and stuff. And so, David, I got one last question for you. So what are 3 key things you've learned and used along your journey?
I had to learn patience. I did not realize that I did not have a lot of patience for myself. And another thing I had to realize too is that I was not the only victim of him. My family was also a victim of him. My friends were also a victim of him. They lost the David that they loved, because I became someone different. Luckily, we loved that person too, but they had to grieve too. They were also victims, as well as his family and his children were also victims of his actions. And so that was a punch in the gut, but that I would not change for the world. I'm glad that I found that. And I also found where I stand with the word forgiveness and what that truly means for me. And so I think those would be the 3 things that I wear with a badge of honor at this stage of my life after what happened.
Yeah. It took a long time to get there too for those 3 things?
Yeah, I would say, so I say the 3-year mark a lot. That was that pivotal moment, right? And of course, I'm not done learning. I'm not done exploring this. There's still questions I may never know the answer to. But I've learned to enjoy the ride. I'm not wishing to be done anymore.
All right. So you're always working on yourself and you're seeking to find answers to the questions that you have as you go along. Cool. Awesome. David, I appreciate it. And I'm glad you shared your story and you're open and, telling the world. And, I'm glad you came on here. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, me too, man. I really appreciate you. Thanks for giving me a cool, safe place. So nice to connect.
Yeah, absolutely.